What's up, guys? If you're not subscribed, please subscribe. Also, please smash that like button on the video and enjoy the show. Now, you've been talking all about these proxy groups throughout this conversation. You mentioned Hezbollah. You mentioned Hamas, which that's a little separate right now. We'll get to that. Yemen. What were some of the other ones?
So Kataib Hezbollah, which is the Iraqi group, one of the Iraqi groups.
Okay. So can we start with Hezbollah and just explain this? Because I believe Soleimani, and I think you just said this, Soleimani was like the main leader of them. But when was Hezbollah formed? Where do they operate out of? And what's their main objective?
Yeah, so they kind of grew out of the Israeli, sort of long-running conflict with Israelis, but they're essentially an anti-Israel. That's their reason for existing. And it's the Shiite militia group. It's all based mostly in southern Lebanon and also up in the Bekaa Valley, which is a little bit to the east. But vehemently anti-Israel. They've armed themselves down to the point they have something like 150,000 rockets and missiles pointed at Israel. So if there ever was a conflict, that's the reason that there's real fear about the Gaza crisis spreading to Lebanon, because Hamas, it's awful, horrible group, but it was also fairly limited in its capabilities. It had a lot of rockets, but they weren't very sophisticated. Hezbollah's got the real deal. They've got a lot more rockets, and they've got some guided systems, so they could potentially have some precision strikes on nuclear plants or military bases, airports. They could do a lot of damage in a hurry.
Yeah, and I see that I'm looking on Wikipedia on the side here. I'm seeing their size is around like 100,000 people.
Yeah, it's a huge thing, and that's their armed force. And they've been fighting in Syria now because they became directly involved in the Syrian conflict. And so there's a generation of fighters that have combat experience from their time in Syria.
And what was the name of the one in Iraq you mentioned there?
Oh, Kataib Hezbollah.
Okay, so that's am I right in saying that's like a estuary of Hezbollah itself?
So they're not directly related, but it's all kind of Hezbollah, meaning it's party of God, and so it's essentially it's nice to have that kind of authority, I guess. But there must be 20 or 25 groups like that in Iraq. Kataib Hezbollah is one of the more prominent ones.
And are they, I assume they're the people who are like helping create the Underground Railroad between Iran and Syria.
And they're well armed now. So they're the ones that every now and then, see missiles lobbed at an army base where Americans are based.
Oh my God.
And it's typically them, and then there's one other group that has a lot of that capability.
Okay, so October 7th happens. That is an Israel-Hamas situation. I want to come to that in a second, but you mentioned Hezbollah, there being an issue there in Lebanon now potentially. I remember in the days after that, maybe like October 9th, October 10th, whatever it was, there was military conflict between some Hezbollah guys, I want to say, and Israel on the northern border, but that has since died down?
It's died down in the news, but it's happening almost every week. There's been a few attacks.
What kind of attacks?
Some of it looks symbolic. There's a sense that Hezbollah doesn't really want to get deeply involved in this, but they want to show the colors. They want to show their comrades in arms in Gaza that they're on their side. So it's mostly just an occasional rocket attack at a long distance attack on an Israeli base. Or rockets will fall on an Israeli village near the border, which are mostly evacuated now. There's not a lot of people who live there. But it's surprisingly regular, and it's a little bit, it's showing the flag, but it's more dangerous than that because there's always the potential that they're going to hit something big, and the Israelis are going to retaliate because they have to. And then if they do, then Hezbollah may do something else. So this tit-for-tat exchange could get really, really ugly quickly.
Okay,
and that's always the fear. And with all the proxy groups, it's this way right now. Even the Houthis, because they haven't struck a lot of things, but say they did. What if they killed? What if they hit a Navy destroyer and killed some sailors?
Big deal,
and we'd have to come after them in a big way because we just couldn't ignore that. And so there's a fear that Hezbollah will hit something in Israel that's so hurtful that Israelis will be forced to respond in a big way, and then suddenly Lebanon is dragged into the war too.
How closely allied and incommunicado with each other are Hezbollah and Hamas.
Yeah. So they've had an off and on relationship because Hamas is a Sunni group, and so they don't have the same affinities that they.
Right.
They actually were on different sides in the Syrian conflict. There was a split between them because they don't like Assad, and so they kind of broke with Hezbollah for a bit.
That's like you ever seen that meme of the Bloods and Crips holding up the things together?
Oh, yeah.
It's like Hamas and Israel. Like, yeah, we don't like that guy though.
Yeah, that's right. The enemy of our enemy, but then just in the last few years before the crisis, you saw them kind of make up, and there were lots of delegations traveling to Lebanon for meetings, for training. We think there was a significant amount of training of some of the Hamas cadres that were ended up getting involved in the Gaza crisis. So they do help each other. They're certainly strong allies, but Hezbollah so far just doesn't want to go into it full-fledged. They're just waiting on the wings.
And I guess similarly to what we were talking about with Hezbollah, for background here, what is the history of Hamas, and was Iran involved from day one?
So they grew out of the Muslim Brotherhood movement, which is strictly a Sunni movement, anti-Israel, sort of hardline resistance to Israeli, Israeli control of Palestinian territory. That's what they've been all about since the earliest days. The deeper I get into the history of the Palestinians and the different factions and groups, they sometimes fight each other more than they fight the Israelis. The Hamas people fighting and killing members of the PLO, the Fatah movement, and they've been bitter enemies at times as well. And Hamas as an organization has objected to the idea of any kind of a combination with Israel. Anything that recognizes Israel's right to exist, they've seen as wrongheaded, and they've opposed it. And that's why their continued presence is such a problem for the Israelis, because they think that there can't be any peace in that region with Hezbollah having any kind of serious control of territory, because they've said publicly they would strike Israel again if they get a chance.
All right, I want to be careful how we navigate all this, because obviously there's an ongoing war. It's horrible. No one likes to see people getting killed left and right. Obviously what happened at the beginning was terrible. There's seemingly a huge lose-lose across the board situation here. I'm not cynical, but I'm almost like, God damn it, what's even a solution here? But Alessia, I don't know if you can pull this up. 2019, Google this, 2019 Netanyahu Hamas funding.
Yeah, I know
this.
Where you're going with
I can't get out of my. I know where I'm going. I can't get this out of my head. When I saw this, and I'm somebody. There are two leaders that I have studied over the past 4 or 5 years extensively around the world: Vladimir Putin and Benjamin Netanyahu. I've read thousands of pages on these guys. I've read Netanyahu's personal biography, the whole bit. Biographies that were written more against him, stuff like that. And he is a very, very complicated guy. I even said there was some conversation I had about it on the podcast with you over a year ago, where some of it, looking back on it, I thought about it after. I'm like, I feel like that's misinformed. So I got more into him. I'd really been a Putin guy, and then I'd looked at some Netanyahu, but I really got deep on him last year before all this conflict happened, ironically. But this quote, grab this one, Alessi. For years, Netanyahu propped up Hamas. Okay, so this is from the Times of Israel, and this has been reported in a lot of places. But according to various reports, Netanyahu made a similar point at a Likud faction meeting in early 2019, when he was quoted as saying that those who oppose a Palestinian state should support the transfer of funds to Gaza, because maintaining the separation between the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank and Hamas in Gaza would prevent the establishment of a Palestinian state. So translating that into English, what that would mean, if this quoted report is true, which is worth a question, are some of his enemies trying to misquote him? But that would mean he's saying, let's give money to Hamas because they'll be separate from PLO. They'll also wreak havoc if we do that. I don't know. Yeah. We'll have some excuse to be able to go in there and clean stuff up. Now, obviously nobody ever wants to see what happened and what went down there. But you have to wonder on his personal history with this if there's a deeper point here.
Yeah.
Because he was prime minister from, I want to say, 96 to 99. And then he was voted out in favor of that guy who's friends with Epstein. What the hell's his name again? What was the prime minister's name?
Was it Barack?
Yeah, Ehud Barak. And then he became, once Shimon Peres got back in charge, he became the finance minister. So Netanyahu did. So he was high up in the cabinet. And he ended up, after having a successful run, very successful for Israel, a run as finance minister, he resigned from the government because of the original deal they made to give the land to Gaza. Like, that was his red line. He's like, you cannot do this. If you do this, I will resign. Right? Impression. And so he then stepped away from the government. Eventually, 3 years later, he gets voted in as prime minister, but Gaza's already been given up. So this Gaza thing was a personal pain point to him because actually, in his defense, I'll say this, he's like, why are we going to put something right in our backyard that's going to end up having problems with it? Fast forward 13 years later, he's quoting saying, well, it's in our backyard, but if we want to get rid of it, maybe we should fund the people in there that are causing the most chaos. Yeah. Have you gotten any sources or anyone around the situation who can speak to the veracity, like how real this quote is, or if there is some sort of, espionage type activity to prop up an evil group like Hamas such that they can have the mandate to be able to say, all right, let's get them out of there?
Yeah. Well, certain things are absolutely true and just verifiable as far as I'm concerned. One is that Netanyahu in particular and his government in general adopted a policy to prop up Hamas. And that happened over several years. And I've seen the documents, the Israeli government thanking Qatar, who was essentially kind of the conduit for a lot of the money that came to Hamas. But they said, yeah, this is great. So is there a situation where there was actually suitcases full of cash that were coming to Hamas to keep them going? And the idea was suitcases full of cash. Yeah. And then it got a little more sophisticated than that, but in the beginning it was literally suitcases full of cash. And the sort of the difficulty that I think the Israelis as a country are wrestling with is the fact that a bet was made that you can kind of divide and separate. We can contain Hamas because they're in this little area. They're not going to get out. We've got this really great defensive system around Gaza, so they're not going to cause any trouble for us. We'll make them, prosperous enough that they're just going to be fat and happy and not be a problem for us. But because the Hamas and the Palestinian, Authority don't like each other, it's a way of kind of splitting those two apart, going to keep them opposed to one another, and it's going to be impossible to have a Palestinian state because of this conflict. Essentially, there's a way to prolong this very ambiguous situation where there's, some leaders say that we eventually favor a two-state solution, but in practicality, they're doing everything they can against that to make sure it doesn't ever happen. And I think Netanyahu embraced that strategy, wholeheartedly, and his fingerprints are all over this supporting of Hamas with funding, and it I think as part of the reckoning that's eventually going to have to happen. I'm not going to begin to be able to tell Israelis how to vote, but when there is a political reckoning in Israel, when there are elections, people are thinking about this, about the decisions that were made, over years to in a way enable Hamas, thinking that they would be controlled and they would never be able to do something like they did on October 7, which surprised and shocked everybody. Yes. Nobody thought Hamas could pull off something like that.
How did they do it? Because I know how good Mossad is.
Yeah.
You want to talk about a swing and a miss?
Yeah.
I mean, you can't take a shit along that Gaza border without there being patrolmen. How did these guys get across and do this?
Yeah, they had a really good intel, and we're still not sure exactly how they got all of it. The Iranians probably helped, but they had a pretty good sense of exactly when to do it, what parts of where to send their forces, where to go over the wall. They had this sort of all the kibbutzes and the bases mapped out to the square meter where they were going to go and what they were going to do. It was a very, very sophisticated operation, and it was low tech in a way. And we kept thinking that we were going to see more impressive weapons from Hamas than we eventually saw, but they were really good at what they had, and so there was just this element of surprise. The Israelis did not think that an attack was coming from Gaza; they just didn't see it. They should have seen. There were lots of warning signs that could be read later. A lot of that evidence, just like with our 9/11 situation, was ignored or misread, and so. And Hezbollah got lucky in some ways too. They managed to did it on a Sabbath, on a holiday when some of these observation stations were not looking for anything, and they were vicious. They I know in this country we were quite surprised too. But the Israelis, and I've talked to a lot of folks in IDF and in the intel community, and everybody's fully, candid about this. We really were fooled. We really didn't see it coming. It's one of the greatest failings in our history to let this happen to us.
Thank you for watching the video, guys. If you haven't already subscribed, please smash that subscribe button and check out this clip's full podcast episode by clicking here or in the description below.